for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
And welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. I'm Darren Gibson, your host, and I'm still basking in the afterglow of Donald Trump being convicted on 34 counts in his hush money trial. Trump gets sentenced on July 11th, so it's the week after Independence Day. Hopefully we're independent of Trump for about 4 years or so. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that the judge does the right thing in sentencing. We will see. However, that afterglow may be short-lived because Republicans who see Trump conviction as politically motivated are vowing to indict the left. We will tell you about that in the show. Plus, we've got primary elections. Yes, there's still primaries going on. This is about the last of them, though. Of course, the conventions are coming up next month in July, so we will tell you all about that when we get to our show today. Right now, let me remind you that you can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can follow us on X at Southpaws Radio. You can follow us on Tumblr at southpawsradioshow.tumblr.com. You can follow us on YouTube and Mastodon by doing a search for Southpaws Radio. You can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime at Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Podcast Addict, Podvine, and Pandora by doing a search for Southpaws. And once you found our logo, you found us. We send links to our weekly episodes to our Facebook, X, Tumblr, YouTube, and Mastodon accounts. You can listen to us on Global Community Radio Channel 1 every Saturday night at 11 Eastern, and you can listen to us on great Pacifica stations including KCEI in Taos, New Mexico, KZGM in Kabul, Missouri, and KEPJ in San Antonio, Texas. So be sure to listen to us on your local Pacifica affiliate. We are recording the show on Thursday, June 6, 2024. Today is the 80th anniversary of the D-Day invasion. That's where U.S. troops and Allied troops stormed Omaha Beach and started the fight to take back control of France. So, very pivotal point in World War II. Very few World War II veterans still alive. So, the ones that are there are over in Normandy, and I believe President Biden is over there with his wife, Dr. Jill Biden. Lots of dignitaries from other countries. I believe members of the royal family from England are there as well. So, yeah, D-Day, very important in our history, and it's something that we need to remember every year, the D-Day invasion. All right, let's go ahead. Let's start with our first story today. This is Allie Swenson writing for the Associated Press. This is dated June 4th out of New York City. In the days since Donald Trump was convicted of 34 felonies in his criminal hush money trial, Republicans who view the case as politically motivated have coalesced around a new rallying cry: prosecute the left. Let me just stop right there. Donald Trump was charged as a result of a grand jury. He was put on trial. 12 members of a jury found him guilty on all 34 counts. He is going to be sentenced by a judge. This has nothing to do with Biden or the Democrats trying to get rid of Trump. I wish it was, but it isn't. Period. End of story. Donald Trump got what Donald Trump deserved. He has been held unaccountable for far too long for far too many things. This is what is called justice. Bottom line. Candidates, office holders, and members of Donald Trump's family have amplified Trump's calls for retribution against political enemies and urged their fellow Republicans to start charging Democrats with crimes. Representative Mike Collins of Georgia wrote on X, formerly Twitter, quote, time for red state attorney generals and district attorneys to get busy, end of quote. This came about after the Manhattan jury found Trump guilty. Influential conservative activist Charlie Kirk urged Republican prosecutors to get creative in bringing charges. On X, he said, quote, indict the left or lose America, end of quote. Really? Oh, my gosh. Yeah. In a podcast interview, Donald Trump's oldest son, Donald Trump Jr., said, quote, we have to fight fire with fire, end of quote. Yeah. Please, I dare you guys to try it. I dare you. Please. Give me an excuse. Give us leftists an excuse. Please. And Trump on Tuesday suggested that he might try to retaliate against Hillary Clinton, his 2016 opponent, if he returns to the White House. In an interview with Newsmax, which is not news, it is propaganda, Propaganda Max, Trump said this, quote, wouldn't it be terrible to throw the president's wife and the former Secretary of State, think of it, the former Secretary of State, but the president's wife into jail? Wouldn't that be a terrible thing? But they want to do it. It's a terrible, terrible path that they're leading us to, and it's very possible that it's going to happen to them. End of quote. Like I said, please try it and watch what happens. Because the bad stuff ain't going to happen to us lefties, because we won't tolerate it. We were the Antifa in World War II. You want to try it here? We'll be Antifa again. The calls to weaponize the judicial system against Democrats are a degree more intense than some other suggestions for retaliation that Republicans have made since the guilty verdict, such as calls to investigate the prosecutors in the Manhattan case or for voters to give their own verdict by sending Trump back to the White House in November. Here's the thing. There was a recent ABC News poll, or no, it was New York Times poll. This conviction, Donald Trump is starting to drop in the polls because of this conviction. You can believe all the other polls you want to. The New York Times said Donald Trump is losing voters because of this conviction, and it's not being publicized nearly enough. Why? Because the establishment media want Trump elected, because they're a bunch of conservatives, conservative-owned, conservative-operated. There is no liberal media in this country except for Pacifica Radio. That's about it, folks. That's about it. NPR, forget NPR. NPR has become corporatized with their sponsors. You want real news? You want real news and views? You go to Pacifica. That's it. That's all. They represent a show of loyalty to Trump, who have spent months calling the cases against him a form of partisan election interference, which is total BS, and referring to President Joe Biden's administration as evil and corrupt. Yeah, evil and corrupt. They also signal a growing feeling among some Republicans that the felony conviction of Trump for falsifying business records to illegally influence an election crossed a boundary in judicial norms. Again, the Associated Press is referring to Trump as former president. We don't do that on this show. Conservative talk show host Megyn Kelly said after Trump was found guilty, quote, what just happened today is a line we can't uncross, and these Democrats will rue the day they decide to use lawfare to stop a presidential candidate. I'm not talking about violence. I'm talking about tit for tat. End of quote. Yeah. In a post on X, Republican House candidate Brandon Gill of Texas lamented what he viewed as raw power rather than an equally applied legal system in the charges being brought against Trump. He said, quote, might makes right. Republicans must wake up to the new reality and respond accordingly. End of quote. Yeah. Like I said, try it and find out what happens. You'll find out the hard way. The outcry comes as Trump and other Republicans have claimed without evidence that Biden and his administration were pulling the strings behind the New York trial. This case was led by a state-level prosecutor, Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. Biden raised Trump's attacks on the judicial system during a fundraiser Monday night in Connecticut. calling them, quote, dangerous for American democracy, end of quote, and noted that Trump was convicted in a state case rather than a federal one. Yeah, you got that right. Attorney General Merrick Garland criticized the idea that the federal government was involved as a conspiracy theory during an appearance Tuesday before the House Judiciary Committee, calling it an attack on the judicial process. He said, quote, we do not control the Manhattan District Attorney. The Manhattan District Attorney does not report to us. The Manhattan District Attorney made its own decisions about cases that he wants to bring under his state law, end of quote. Bingo, bingo. Republicans have pointed to real elements of the case to argue it was politically driven. For one, Bragg, a Democrat, campaigned for office in 2021 in part on his qualifications to take over the office's investigation into Trump. The judge in the case, Juan M. Merchant, donated $15 to Biden in 2020 and has a daughter who works in Democratic politics, though he has said neither affected his ability to be impartial. And prosecutor Matthew Colangelo joined Bragg's office after serving in the Biden administration's Department of Justice. Trump has also criticized Bragg for bringing the case in 2023 when his alleged crime was connected to a campaign 7 years earlier. Bragg has defended his timing, saying he brings cases, quote, when they're ready, end of quote. That's right. Congressional Democrats condemned Republicans' calls to use the justice system to target Democrats as reckless and potentially dangerous to democracy. It's not potentially, it is dangerous to democracy. There is no potentially about it. They said in interviews that such a reaction was uncalled for since Trump had a fair trial by a jury and has the right to appeal. Democrat North Carolina Representative Deborah Ross, the vice-ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, said, quote, a jury of 12 people unanimously found that beyond a reasonable doubt he committed 34 crimes. That is entirely different than coming up with specious charges and having members of Congress dictate who should be sued in frivolous ways, end of quote. Yeah, she's got that right. Maryland Representative Glenn Ivey, another Democrat on the committee, said there's a history of Republicans prosecuting Democrats and vice versa, but he feels, quote, relatively confident that these cases will continue to be resolved by jurors who come to the jury box taking their job seriously and trying to follow the evidence and the law. I sure hope so. As Trump awaits his sentencing next month, prominent Democrats are also facing high-profile prosecutions. New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez is currently on trial on federal bribery charges in New York, while Representative Henry Cuellar of Texas and his wife were indicted last month on conspiracy and bribery charges. Opening statements began Tuesday in a federal case against President Biden's son Hunter, who was charged in Delaware with 3 felonies stemming from a 2018 firearm purchase when he was, according to his memoir, in the throes of a crack addiction. Trump has given different signals in the past on whether he believes prosecuting political enemies is appropriate. In a campaign video last August, he called on Republican attorneys general and district attorneys to closely watch the trials against him. Quote, it's an eye for an eye or it's fight fire with fire, end of quote. Really? But in a town hall in February, he responded to concerns that a second term would be focused on settling old scores by saying, quote, my revenge will be a success, end of quote. When asked whether he would seek revenge on the morning show Fox and Friends on Sunday, Trump struggled to answer, calling it, quote, a really tough question, end of quote, because, quote, these are bad people, end of quote. He said when he was president, he could have locked up Hillary Clinton, but declined to do so. On what charges, idiot? He said, quote, then this happened to me, and so I may feel differently about it, end of quote. Yeah, because all Trump is engaged in is revenge. This is the revenge tour of Donald Trump. Don't fall for his bullshit. And that's what it is. Absolute 100% USDA grade A bullshit. Folks, if Trump gets elected, it's the end of this country. Period. You heard it here first. Unbelievable. All right, let's get to some decent news here. This could be good stuff if it ever happens, but I doubt it does. This is Jamie Keaton writing for the Associated Press. This is dated June 5th out of Geneva. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called Wednesday for a windfall tax on profits of fossil fuel companies to help pay for the fight against global warming, decrying them as the godfathers of climate chaos. And that's a good description for them, too. It really is, folks. Gutierrez took particular aim at the carbon-spewing industry and appealed to media and technology companies to stop taking advertising from its biggest players, as has been done in some places with big tobacco. Gutierrez's comments in a bare-knuckled speech timed for World Environment Day came as the European Commission's climate watching agency reported that last month was the hottest May ever, marking the 12th straight monthly record high. In other words, the last 12 months have been the hottest 12 months in the history of recorded mankind. Think about it, folks. It's scary. The European Union's Copernicus Climate Change Service, a global reference for tracking world temperatures, cited an average surface air temperature of 60.6 degrees Fahrenheit last month, which is higher than the estimated May average before industrial times. The burning of fossil fuels such as oil, gas, and coal is the main contributor to global warming caused by human activity. Meanwhile, the UN Weather Agency predicted an 80% chance that average global temperatures will surpass the 2.7 degree Fahrenheit target set in the landmark Paris Climate Accord of 2015. The World Meteorological Organization, or the WMO, said that the global mean near-surface temperature for each year from 2024 to 2028 is expected to range between 1.1 and 1.9 degrees Celsius hotter than the start of the industrial era. It's also estimated that there's nearly a 1 in 2 chance, 47%, that the average global temperatures over that time frame could top 1.5 degrees Celsius, an increase from just under a 1 in 3 chance projected for the 2023 to 2027 span. Gutierrez spoke from the American Museum of Natural History in New York in a bid to revive focus on climate change at a time when many national elections and conflicts in places like Ukraine, Gaza, and Sudan this year have seized much of the international spotlight. He repeated concerns about subsidies paid out in many countries for fossil fuels, which helps keep prices low for consumers. Yes, as a matter of fact, one of the biggest welfare babies in the United States isn't people on welfare, it's big oil. That's the truth. You want to help cut the budget? Get rid of the subsidies for big oil. They're making record profits. It's unbelievable. He said, quote, climate change is the mother of all stealth taxes paid by everyday people in vulnerable countries and communities. Meanwhile, the godfathers of climate chaos, the fossil fuel industry, rake in record profits and feast off trillions in taxpayer-funded subsidies. End of quote. Man, he hit that right on the head. Gutierrez said the global emissions of carbon dioxide must fall 9% each year to 2030 for the 1.5 Celsius degree target under the Paris Climate Accords to be kept alive. But temperatures are, in his words, heading in the wrong direction. They rose 1 degree last year. Here's what Gutierrez said, quote, we are playing Russian roulette with the planet. We need an exit ramp off the highway to climate hell. The truth is we have control of the wheel. End of quote. Noah Diffenbaugh, a professor at Stanford's Doerr School of Sustainability, said in an email of the WMO forecast, quote, this forecast is affirmation that the world has entered a climate where years that are as hot as 2023 should no longer be a surprise. End of quote. Gutierrez called on advanced economies in the group of 20 countries, which are holding a summit in Brazil next month and are responsible for about 80% of all emissions, to take the lead. He also said that the richest 1% of the people on the planet emit as much as 2/3 of all humanity. Gutierrez said, quote, we cannot accept a future where the rich are protected in air-conditioned bubbles while the rest of humanity is lashed by lethal weather in unlivable lands. End of quote. He appealed to global finance, alluding to banks and international financial institutions to help contribute money, saying innovative sources of funds are needed. Quote, it's time to put an effective price on carbon and tax the windfall profits of fossil fuel companies. End of quote. But Gutierrez said that all countries and people must join the fight, including the developing world, such as by ending deforestation and meeting targets to double energy efficiency and triple renewables by 2030. Some critics say Gutierrez, with such alarmist speeches, puts too much focus on stirring emotions than focusing on science that lays out the actual threat. But UN officials and non-governmental groups acknowledge that the Secretary General has little power beyond the bully pulpit, his perch at the head of the world body, to stir people, governments, and business to change. So we'll see if they do. Speaking of governments, Mexico has a new president, and we got to talk about her. This is Maria Verza and Mark Stevenson writing for the Associated Press. This is dated June 3rd out of Mexico City. Mexico's projected presidential winner, Claudia Sheinbaum, will become the first female president in the country's 200-year history. Sheinbaum, the favored successor of outgoing President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, vowed to continue on the direction set by the populist leftist leader, but the cool-tempered scientist offers a sharp contrast in style and a break with Mexico's male-dominated political culture. Greeting supporters in Mexico City's colonial-era main plaza, the Zocalo, Sheinbaum said, quote, "I promise that I am not going to let you down," end of quote. The National Electoral Institute's president said Sheinbaum had received 58.3% and 60.7% of the vote, while opposition candidate Xochitl Gálvez had between 26.6% and 28.6%. Jorge Alvarez Mañez had between 9.9% and 10.8% of the vote. Sheinbaum's Morena party was also projected to hold its majorities in both chambers of Congress. The climate scientist and former Mexico City mayor said that her two competitors had called her and conceded her victory. The official preliminary count put Sheinbaum 28 points ahead of Gálvez, with nearly 50% of polling places reporting. The fact that the two leading candidates were women had left little doubt that Mexico would make history Sunday. Shortly after her victory was confirmed, Sheinbaum said, quote, "As I have said on other occasions, I do not arrive alone. We all arrive with our heroines who gave us our homeland, with our mothers, our daughters, and our granddaughters," end of quote. Sheinbaum will also be the first person from a Jewish background to lead the overwhelmingly Catholic country. She will start her 6-year term on October 1st. Mexico's constitution does not allow re-election. The leftist has said that she believes the government has a strong role to play in addressing economic inequality and providing a sturdy social safety net, much like her political mentor. López Obrador's anointed successor, the 61-year-old Sheinbaum, consistently led in polls despite a spirited challenge from Gálvez. This was the first time in Mexico that the two main opponents were women. López Obrador said shortly after the electoral authorities' announcement, quote, "Of course I congratulate Claudia Sheinbaum with all my respect, who ended up the winner by a wide margin. She is going to be Mexico's first female president in 200 years," end of quote. If the margin holds, it would approach his landslide victory in 2018. López Obrador won the presidency after two unsuccessful tries with 53.2% of the votes in a three-way race where National Action took 22.3% and the Institutional Revolutionary Party took 16.5%. Still, Sheinbaum is unlikely to enjoy the kind of unquestioning devotion that López Obrador has enjoyed. In the Zocalo, Sheinbaum's win did not draw the kind of cheering, jubilant crowds that greeted López Obrador's victory in 2018. Those present were enthusiastic but comparatively few in number. 76-year-old Sarah Rios, a retired literature professor at Mexico's National Autonomous University, celebrated after hearing that Gálvez had conceded. She said, quote, "The only way that we move forward is by working together. She is going to work to bring peace to the country and is going to manage to advance, but it is a slow process," end of quote. 28-year-old chef Fernando Fernandez said he voted for Sheinbaum because of her ties to López Obrador, using the presidential initials AMLO. But his highest hope is that Sheinbaum can improve what AMLO couldn't do: the price of gasoline, crime and drug trafficking, which he didn't combat even though he had the power. The main opposition candidate, Gálvez, a tech entrepreneur and former senator, had promised a more aggressive approach toward organized crime. In her concession speech, she said, quote, "I want to stress that my recognition of her victory comes with a firm demand for results and solutions of the country's serious problems," end of quote. Lopez Obrador claims to have reduced historically high homicide levels by 20% since he took office in December 2018, but that's largely a claim based on a questionable reading of statistics. The real homicide rate appears to have declined by only about 4% in 6 years. Julio Garcia, a Mexico City office worker, said he voted for the opposition because of crime. The 34-year-old said, quote, "They've robbed me twice at gunpoint. You have to change direction, change leadership. Continuing in the same way, we're going to become Venezuela," end of quote. On the fringes of Mexico City in the neighborhood of San Andres Totoltepec, 34-year-old homemaker Stefanias Navarrete said that she planned to vote for Sheinbaum despite her own doubts about Lopez Obrador and his party. Quote, "Having a woman president for me as a Mexican woman is going to be like before when, for the simple fact that you say you are a woman, you're limited to certain professions. Not anymore," end of quote. She said the social programs of Sheinbaum's mentor were crucial, but added that deterioration of cartel violence in the past few years was her primary concern in this election. Nearly 100 million people were registered to vote, and turnout appeared to be at about 60%, which is similar to earlier elections. Voters were also electing governors in 9 of the country's 32 states and choosing candidates for both houses of Congress, thousands of mayorships, and other local posts in the biggest elections the nation has seen, and ones that have been marked by violence. The elections were widely seen as a referendum on Lopez Obrador, a populist who has expanded social programs but largely failed to reduce cartel violence in Mexico. His Morena party currently holds 23 of the 32 governorships and a simple majority of seats in both houses of Congress. Sheinbaum promised to continue all of Lopez Obrador's policies, including a universal pension for the elderly and a program that pays youths to apprentice. Just as the upcoming November rematch between President Joe Biden and Donald Trump has underscored deep divisions in the U.S., Sunday's election revealed how severely polarized public opinion is in Mexico over the direction of the country, including its security strategy and how to grow the economy. So there's that, folks. All right, I want to get to our next story here. This is Jake Offenhartz writing for the Associated Press. This is dated June 4th out of New York. Student editors at the Columbia Law Review say they were pressured by the journal's board of directors to halt publication of an academic article written by a Palestinian human rights lawyer that accuses Israel of committing genocide in Gaza and upholding an apartheid regime. When the editors refused the request and published the piece Monday morning, the board, made up of faculty and alumni from Columbia University's law school, shut down the Law Review's website entirely. It remained offline Tuesday evening, a static homepage informing visitors the domain is under maintenance. The episode at one of the country's oldest and most prestigious legal journals marks the latest flashpoint in an ongoing debate about academic speech that has deeply divided students, staff, and college administrators since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. Several editors at the Columbia Law Review described the board's intervention as an unprecedented breach of editorial independence at the periodical, which is run by students at Columbia Law School. The board of directors oversees the nonprofit's finances, but has historically played no role in selecting pieces. In a letter sent to student editors Tuesday and shared with the Associated Press, the board of directors said it was concerned that the article, titled Nakba as a Legal Concept, had not gone through the, quote, usual processes of review or selection for articles at the Law Review, and in particular that a number of student editors had been unaware of its existence. In order to preserve the status quo and provide student editors some window of opportunity to review the piece, as well as provide time for the Law Review to determine how to proceed, we temporarily suspended the website, end of quote. Those involved in soliciting and editing the piece said they had followed a rigorous review process, even as they acknowledged taking steps to forestall expected blowback by limiting the number of students aware of the article. In the piece, Rabea Egbaraya, a Harvard doctoral candidate, accuses Israel of a litany of crimes against humanity, arguing for a new legal framework to encapsulate the ongoing structure, quote, of subjugation in Palestine and derive a legal formulation of the Palestinian condition, end of quote. Egbaraya said in a text message that the suspension of the Law Journal's website should be seen as, quote, a microcosm of a broader authoritarian repression taking place across U.S. campuses, end of quote. Editors say they voted overwhelmingly in December to commission a piece on Palestinian legal issues, then formed a smaller committee open to all of the publication's editorial leadership that ultimately accepted Agbaria's article. He had submitted an earlier version of the article to the Harvard Law Review, which the publication later elected not to publish, and amid eternal backlash, according to the report in The Intercept. Anticipating similar controversy and worried about a leak of the draft, the committee of editors working on the article did not upload it to a server that is visible to the broader membership of the Law Review and to some administrators. The piece was not shared until Sunday with the full staff of the Columbia Law Review, something that editorial staffers said was not uncommon. Sohum Paul, an articles editor at the publication, said, quote, we've never circulated a particular article in advance, so the idea that this is all over a process concern is a total lie. It's very transparently content-based, end of quote. In their letter to students, the board of directors said student editors who didn't work on the piece should have been given an opportunity to read it and raise concerns. They wrote, quote, whatever your views of this piece, it will clearly be controversial and potentially have an impact on all associated with the review, end of quote. Those involved in the publishing of the article said they heard from a small group of students over the weekend who expressed concerns about threats to their careers and safety if it were to be published. Some alluded to trucks that circled Columbia and other campuses following Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel, labeling students as anti-Semites for their past or current affiliation with groups seen as hostile to Israel. The letter from the board also suggested that a statement be appended to the piece stating that the article had not been subject to a standard review process or made available for all student editors to read ahead of time. Erica Lopez, an editor who worked on the piece, and many students were adamantly opposed to the idea, calling it, quote, completely false to imply that we didn't follow the standard process, end of quote. She said student editors had spoken regularly since they began receiving pushback from the board on Sunday and remained firmly in support of the piece. When they learned the website had been shuttered Monday morning, they quickly uploaded Agbaria's article to a publicly accessible website. It has since spread widely across social media. Lopez added, quote, it's really ironic that this piece probably got more attention than anything we've normally published, even after they nuked the website, end of quote. Yeah, so censorship happening at the Columbia Law Review is pathetic. I hate censorship. It doesn't need to happen. And especially when you're censoring students, that's really egregious in my book. All right, let's get to our next story here. This is Michelle L. Price writing for the Associated Press. This is dated June 4th out of New York. President Joe Biden and Donald Trump won Democratic and Republican primaries in a handful of states Tuesday, among some of the last contests on the 2024 primary calendar. Trump, appearing on the ballot for the first time since his historic conviction for felony crimes, won primaries in New Mexico, where voters could opt for his rivals who have since dropped out, and Montana and New Jersey, where he was unopposed. Biden won Democratic primaries in New Mexico, South Dakota, New Jersey, Montana, and Washington, D.C. Trump and Biden were both expected to easily prevail in all of Tuesday's contests as the last major candidate still running. But with many Americans saying in polls that they don't want a rematch of the 2020 election, Tuesday's results were watched for voter concerns about their choices as November's election barrels closer. Trump's domination during the GOP primary season has also been shadowed by support from a minority of GOP voters for former United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley, who dropped out in March. Tuesday's contests were the first since Haley said 2 weeks ago that she would vote for Trump in November. In New Mexico, where she was still on the ballot, several thousand voters cast ballots for Haley, but as of late Tuesday, she was running below 10% of the vote. There's been an update to that. She actually got about 15% of the vote. Biden has faced his own protest vote in recent contests as Democratic voters unhappy with his handling of Israel's war with Hamas seek to register their disapproval. There are organized campaigns in several states Tuesday to vote for uncommitted in the Democratic contests. In New Jersey's primary, uncommitted was on the ballot in many counties above the phrase, Justice for Palestine, Permanent Ceasefire Now. More than 35,000 people voted uncommitted in New Jersey as of late Tuesday. After Tuesday, Democrats have 2 additional caucuses on June 8th for Guam and the U.S. Virgin Islands to close out their 2024 primary calendar. Republicans in D.C. held a party-run primary in March. South Dakota canceled its Republican presidential primary because Trump was uncontested. Meanwhile, voters on Tuesday also cast ballots in primary races for federal, state, and local offices in those states. Retired Navy SEAL Tim Sheehy won the Republican nomination for U.S. Senate in Montana. Sheehy, who had the backing of Trump and national Republican leaders, will face Democratic Senator John Tester in what's expected to be one of the most competitive races that could decide control of the chamber. In New Jersey, Representative Andy Kim won the Democratic nomination for the seat held by scandal-plagued Democrat Senator Bob Menendez, who is on trial in New York on federal corruption charges. Menendez decided not to run in the primary. He filed paperwork Monday to run in the general election as an independent candidate. By the way, Representative Andy Kim is not Andy Kim, the Canadian singer that had a hit in the 1970s with Rock Me Gently, just to let you know. On the Republican side, businessman Curtis Bashaw won, defeating Trump's pick, Mendham Borough Mayor Christine Serrano-Glasner. Herb Conaway defeated 4 Democrats as they competed in a primary for the state's 3rd district, which Kim holds and which is expected to stay in Democratic hands in November. Menendez's son, first-term Representative Rob Menendez, overcame a tough primary challenge in New Jersey's 8th District from Hoboken Mayor Ravi Bala. In New Mexico, where Democrats hold all 3 of the state's U.S. House seats, only one primary was being held in the 1st District. Republicans Louis Sanchez and Steve Jones were competing to take on incumbent Melanie Stansbury in a Democratic-leaning district based in Albuquerque. In D.C., voters were deciding a primary for the city's non-voting delegate in the U.S. House. In Iowa, which kicked off the presidential contest in January with its first-in-the-nation caucuses, voters were choosing nominees in primary elections for local races in U.S. House seats, including one that could play a key role in determining control of the House. Democrats in the Des Moines area 3rd Congressional District chose Lannon Backham as their nominee to take on the first-term Republican U.S. Representative Zach Nunn, who edged out an incumbent Democrat in 2022. So hopefully that wraps up the primaries and that. Well, Michigan actually has primaries in August, but the presidential primaries are pretty much wrapped up. So in Michigan in August, there will be primaries for the U.S. Senate, for Congress, and for all the state House races. So it's important to vote in August as well. And there's probably going to be some school board stuff as well, depending on what location you're in. All right, let's go to our next story here. This is Devi Shastri writing for the Associated Press. This is dated June 4th. This has to do with the healthcare system. Actually, our next couple of articles are going to deal with the healthcare system. Basin Pharmacy fills more than prescriptions in rural northern Wyoming. It's also the key healthcare access point for the town of about 1,300 people and the surrounding area. It sells catheters, colostomy supplies, and diabetic testing strips. The storage room contains things that people rely on to survive, such as a dozen boxes of food for patients who must eat through tubes. The pharmacy fills prescriptions in bulk for the county jail, state retirement center, and youth group homes. Some patients come from Jackson, 5 hours away by car for the specialized services. Pharmacist Craig Jones makes house calls when no one else can, answers his phone at all hours of the night, and stops to chat about bowel movements at church. Yet Jones keeps a pile of his own paychecks on a desk in the back of his pharmacy. 4 months' worth, uncashed. Of the financial pressures on his business, Jones said, quote, "Every year it's a little worse," end of quote. Rural pharmacies, independent or chain, can be a touchstone for their communities. The staff knows everyone's names and drugs, answers questions about residents' mail-order prescriptions, or can spot the signs of serious illness. But rural pharmacies' business models face unrelenting pressures to the point that sometimes they have to close. Several largely rural states have some of the lowest number of pharmacies per zip code, according to an Associated Press analysis of data from 49 states and the National Council for Prescription Drug Programs. The closest pharmacy to Basin Pharmacy is 8 miles away in Graybull, and Jones and 2 other pharmacists opened it after the department store chain that ran its predecessor went bankrupt. When a pharmacy does close in a rural area, communities feel the absence. In Herscher, Illinois, news came out of nowhere that the CVS would shut down in early March. Mayor Shannon Sweeney met with CVS representatives and asked them to delay the closure for his village of 1,500 people that's 80 miles south of Chicago, but he said the company told him the front of the store was not making enough money. Pharmacy access is an important consideration, according to CVS spokesman Matt Blanchette. But the company also weighs local market dynamics, population shifts, and the number of stores in the area selling similar products. He confirmed the meeting with Sweeney, but did not directly answer a question about what financial issues led the store to close. Tammy McLearin came to the CVS twice a month to pick up medications for her blood pressure and cholesterol on her way to and from work near Kankakee. She moved her prescriptions to the CVS near work because she doesn't want to get them through the mail. Her village isn't a top priority for snow removal in the winter, and her late husband's heart medications would often get lost in the mail. She said of the pharmacy, which was part of a small statewide chain before CVS bought it in 2017, quote, "We're losing convenience, a staple. I hope another pharmacy goes in here," end of quote. Sweeney said that's his goal, preferably an independent one. But in the months since the closure, 2 promising leads have dried up, leaving them dead in the water, he said. 4 of Wyoming's independent pharmacies closed last year, according to Melinda Carroll, legislative director of the state's Pharmacy Association. 2 more, 1 independent and 1 chain, have closed so far this year. Jones plans to hold out in Basin. He owns 2 other businesses there, a cafe next to the pharmacy and a grocery store for which he cashed in some of his retirement accounts to keep it from closing. But some 25% of the prescriptions he fills today are reimbursed for less than what he bought the medication for. Jones said he lost $30,000 between the beginning of the year and mid-May, hence the uncashed payroll checks. He said, quote, "I'm working for free a lot, and I don't mind. I love to serve the community. But I kind of resent having to do that because of large corporations, huge pharmacy benefit managers that are making millions of dollars a year," end of quote. Pharmacy benefit managers, or BPMs, help employers and insurers decide which drugs are covered for millions of Americans. And the lack of transparency around fees and low reimbursements from is one of the biggest financial pressures for rural pharmacies. That's according to Delisha Carpenter of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, who leads a research alliance of more than 140 rural pharmacies and 7 universities. But Greg Lopez, a spokesman for the Pharmaceutical Care Management Association that represents BPMs, disputed their role in closures and noted that some companies work with rural pharmacies to get higher reimbursements for drugs. Jones came back to the Basin area after pharmacy school. His daughter Camilla would come into the pharmacy with him on Sunday, and he'd quiz her on different medications. She's now the president-elect of the State Pharmacy Association and helps run the Basin Pharmacy. Camilla Hancock said, quote, "We've definitely tried to do everything we can to run lean to find other options to try and make money to keep our doors open so we can continue to serve patients. But when you're working so hard and you're trying your darndest to accomplish these things and you kind of just get kicked in the gut and over, it's really disheartening," end of quote. Jones admitted that if it weren't for the devastating impact on his daughter's future, quote, "I'd pack it in. I wish I could say that I had this healthy, wonderful business I could hand off to my daughter, but I worry whether it's even going to be worthwhile for her to take it over if we can't make a profit on it or even pay our own wages," end of quote. Yeah, so that's the status of pharmacies in rural America, and since I live in rural America, I can attest to that. Oh boy. We got another story about the U.S. healthcare system. This is Tom Murphy, writing for the Associated Press. This is dated June 2nd. Tamika Davis couldn't nap on her couch during cancer treatment. She kept worrying one of her toddlers would wander over and pull out the needle delivering chemotherapy. Friends and family watched her kids when they could during her treatment last year for colon cancer. But Davis had gaps with no help because she couldn't afford child care and didn't know where to look for assistance. The San Antonio, Texas resident said, quote, "I did not have the strength nor the energy to try to navigate these things myself," end of quote. Patients are not getting enough help dealing with a healthcare system that is growing increasingly complex, according to researchers and other experts in care delivery. They say more frequent insurance complications, doctor and drug shortages, and a lack of communication all make life harder for people with serious or chronic illnesses. Elizabeth Schuler, founder and president of Patient Navigator, a business that helps people get through the system, said, quote, "Just about anything you can think of, it's now harder to get it done, basically," end of quote. More care providers and employers are offering help guiding people, a practice the federal Medicare program has started to cover. But that assistance has limits. Patients with serious or chronic illnesses face a web of challenges. They include coordinating doctor appointments and tests often while working or undergoing treatment, dealing with coverage denials or care delays due to insurer pre-approval requirements, figuring out how to fill a prescription if they can't get coverage or their medication lands on a growing list of drugs in shortage, acting as a go-between for doctors and specialists who don't talk to each other, paying medical bills and getting help with rent or utilities. That assistance has been harder to find since the COVID-19 pandemic, according to Beth Scott of the nonprofit Patient Advocate Foundation. All of this can be compounded for patients who don't speak English or have no experience navigating the healthcare system. That's according to Gladys Arias, a policy principal with the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. Davis, the San Antonio cancer patient, said she was in the hospital when she asked for help finding community services. She said a case manager set a book of available resources on her bedside table and did nothing else. Davis, a nursing professor, found the book confusing. The programs it detailed had different qualifications based on things like income or diagnosis. The 44-year-old wound up losing her car and leaving her home after care bills piled up. She said, quote, "I feel like there was some type of help for me out there. I just didn't know where to look," end of quote. Allie DiGiacomo said she wishes that she learned in college how to deal with insurance companies. She often has to do that while coping with side effects from rheumatoid arthritis treatments. The 30-year-old personal trainer said she spent years trying to get a diagnosis for bouts of intense chest pain, which doctors think may be tied to her condition. That requires imaging tests that insurers often decline to cover. DiGiacomo said, quote, "Dealing with them with brain fog and fatigue and being in pain is just like the cherry on top," end of quote. DiGiacomo said her formulary or list of covered drugs has changed 3 times. That can force her to hunt for a place that carries the newly covered drug, which puts her behind on her medication schedule. She figures she talks to her insurer at least 4 times a month. Quote, "I have to hype myself up, then you talk to a million different people. I just wish I had like one person that helped me deal with all this," end of quote. Care delays due to insurer pre-approval requirements have grown more common, many experts say. More plans have also made it challenging to get coverage outside their networks of doctors and hospitals. The typical appeal for a denial can easily involve 20 to 30 phone calls between the patient, the insurer, and the doctor's office. That's according to Scott, Director of Case Management of Patient Advocate Foundation, which helps people with chronic or debilitating positions. She said some patients give up. Quote, "Sometimes you are sick and you don't want to fight it anymore," end of quote. Case managers at hospitals are often overworked, which limits how much help they can provide, according to Schuler, who became a patient advocate about 20 years ago after her 2-year-old daughter went through cancer treatment. Overall, help for patients is very patchy everywhere, according to Harvard Medical School researcher Michael Ann Kyle. She said, quote, "I think we have a lot of Band-Aids that are necessary," end of quote. Many cancer centers offer patient navigators who can help coordinate appointments, get answers to coverage questions, find rides to the doctor, and provide other support. Some insurers provide similar assistance. And more employers are offering navigation or advocacy help for people on their insurance plans, according to the benefits consultant Mercer. But these services still aren't widespread. Alzheimer's disease patients and their caregivers lack consistent access to such help. That's according to Sam Fazio, a senior director with the nonprofit Alzheimer's Association. He added, quote, "People are having trouble finding their way," end of quote. Making the system better for patients requires big change, according to Dr. Victor Montori, a Mayo Clinic researcher who studies healthcare delivery. He said the system must focus more on minimally destructive medicine, which makes care fit into patient lives. That means things like cutting unnecessary paperwork and surveys, making appointments more flexible, and giving patients more time with doctors. He noted that the burden that falls on patients is not just the time and effort they spend navigating the system, it's also what they give up to do that. He said, quote, "If you waste people's time on silly things, you are being unkind to their main purpose, which is to live. We have to stop thinking of the patient as a part-time employee of the healthcare system that we don't get to pay," end of quote. So there's the latest updates on our healthcare system in this country, which is abysmal. It really is, folks. We need to have single-payer universal health care now. Get rid of the insurance companies. Get rid of all of them. Let their employees work for the government. And dole out health care the way it should be. The way that other top countries, like all across Europe, Canada, they have single-payer universal health care. And it's a perfect system. It works great. Oh, but people in Canada, they say, oh, we have to wait. No, they really don't. That's a lie that's spread by conservatives so that you stay with the system that gouges you to death, doesn't provide you the care that you deserve, and you end up dying broke, which is what the insurance companies want you to do. They want you to die broke so they can get all of your money, all of your possessions, all of your land. If you own land, they're going to get it. That's all there is to it. It really is, folks. All right, let's get to one final story. This is about CEO pay. This is May Anderson, Paul Harloff, and Barbara Ochuche writing for the Associated Press. This is dated June 3rd out of New York. The typical compensation package for chief executives who run companies in the S&P 500 jumped nearly 13% last year, easily surpassing the gains for workers at a time when inflation was putting considerable pressure on Americans' budgets. The median pay package for CEOs rose to $16.3 million, up 12.6%, according to data analyzed for the Associated Press by Equilar. Meanwhile, wages and benefits netted by private sector workers rose 4.1% through 2023. At half the companies in this year's pay survey, it would take the worker at the middle of the company's pay scale almost 200 years to make what their CEO did. CEOs got rewarded as the economy showed remarkable resilience, underpinning strong profits and boosting stock prices. After navigating the pandemic, companies faced challenges from persistent inflation and higher interest rates. About 24 CEOs in the AP's annual survey received a pay bump of 50% or more. Kelly Malefis, founding partner of Compensation Advisory Partners in New York, said, quote, "In this post-pandemic market, the desire is for boards to reward and retain CEOs when they feel like they have a good leader in place. That all combined kind of leads to increased compensation," end of quote. But Sarah Anderson, who directs the Global Economy Project at the Progressive Institute for Policy Studies, believes the gap in earnings between top executives and workers plays into the overall dissatisfaction among Americans about the economy. She said, quote, "Most of the focus here is on inflation, which people are really feeling, but they're feeling the pain of inflation more because they're not seeing their wages go up enough," end of quote. Many companies have heeded calls from shareholders to tie CEO compensation more closely to performance. As a result, a large proportion of pay packages consist of stock awards, which the CEO often can't cash in for years, if at all, unless the company meets certain targets, typically a higher stock price or market value or improved operating profits. The median stock award rose almost 11% last year compared to a 2.7% increase in bonuses. The AP CEO compensation study included pay data for 341 executives at S&P 500 companies who have served at least 2 full consecutive fiscal years at their companies, which filed proxy statements between January 1st and April 30th. Top earners include Hock Tan, the CEO of Broadcom Incorporated. He topped the AP survey with a pay package valued at $162 million. Broadcom granted Tan stock awards valued at $160.5 million on October 31st, 2022 for the company's 2023 fiscal year. Tan was given the opportunity to earn up to 1 million shares starting in fiscal 2025, according to a securities filing provided that Broadcom stock meets certain targets, and he remained CEO for 5 years. At the time of the award, Broadcom stock was trading at $470. Tan would receive portions of the stock awards if the stock hit $825 and $950, and the full award if the average closing price is at or above $1,125 for 20 consecutive days between October 2025 and October 2027. The targets seemed ambitious when set, but the stock has skyrocketed since and reached an all-time closing high of $1,436.17 on May 28th. Like rival NVIDIA Inc., Broadcom is riding the current artificial intelligence frenzy among tech companies. Its chips are used by businesses and public entities ranging from major banks, retailers, telecom operators, and government bodies. In granting the stock award, Broadcom noted that under Tan, its market value was increased from $3.8 billion in 2009 to $645 billion as of May 23rd, and that its total shareholder return during that time easily surpassed that of the S&P 500. It also said that Tan will not receive additional stock awards during the remainder of the 5-year period. Workers across the country have been winning higher pay since the pandemic, with wages and benefits for private sector employees rising 4.1% in 2023 after a 5.1% increase in 2022, according to the Labor Department. Even with those gains, the gap between the person in the corner office and everyone else keeps getting wider. Half the CEOs in this year's pay survey made at least 196 times what their median employee earned. That's up from 185 times in last year's survey. The gap is particularly wide at companies where employees typically earn lower wages, such as retailers. At Ross Stores, for example, the company says this employee at the very middle of the pay scale was a part-time retail store associate who made $8,618. It would take 2,100 years earning that much to equal CEO Barbara Rentler's compensation from 2023, valued at $18.1 million. A year earlier, it would have taken the median worker 1,137 years to match the CEO's pay. Corporate boards often feel pressure to keep upping the pay for well-performing CEOs out of fear that they'll walk out the door and make more at a rival. They focus on paying compensation that is competitive within their industry or marketplace and not on the pay ratio, Malafis said. The better an executive performs, the more the board is willing to pay. The disparity between what the chief executive makes and the workers earn wasn't always so wide. After World War II and up until the 1980s, CEOs of largely publicly traded companies made about 40 to 50 times the average worker's pay. That's according to Brandon Reeves, Deputy Director of Corporations and Capital Markets for the AFL-CIO, which runs an executive pay watch website that tracks CEOs' pay. Reeves said, quote, "The current pay ratio signals a sort of a winner-take-all culture that companies are treating their CEOs as, as superstars as opposed to team players." End of quote. I'm going to stop the article right here because it does continue on. We'll make this article available on our official website at facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. That's it for this week. We'll be back next week. I'm Darren Gibson. Please support independent media, the First Amendment, and a woman's right to choose.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.